everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Moving to SaaS, Better Data Protection at 50% of the TCO. My name is Anya Gerbeau, and I'm on the marketing team at Juba. I'll be your moderator today. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping items. This webcast is meant to be interactive, so please ask questions using the Q&A pane. We'll take questions at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to your questions, we'll be following up after the webinar via email. Also, as you listen to the webinar, feel free to check out our resource list with a lot of content related to the topic we're discussing today and available for you to view and download. This webcast is being recorded, and we'll be sending out the recording later this week. And with that, I would like to pass it over to our main speaker today, Mike Palmer, Chief Product Officer at Juba. Over to you, Mike.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for attending the webinar today. My name is Mike Palmer, Chief Product Officer here at Juba. I've had the privilege of spending my career working in and around enterprise data centers, whether that entailed building the first large-scale e-commerce sites or working in the world of enterprise networking, moving into storage, ultimately into data protection. And I'm excited to talk to you today about what I really believe is the next evolution of an industry that is critical, that continues to evolve both from the perspective of the storage and backup administrator, but also for the new stakeholders that rely on those roles today, whether they are compliance officers or ultimately folks working in the analytics world. I'm joined today by Prasanna, who is going to help us as a Director of Product Architecture walk through how we deliver our service and also help you as the user compare our architecture and our focus as a company to some of the other options on the market and how we stack up in particular relevant to our topic today, which is as a SaaS provider focused on reducing the cost of data and data management over the long haul, why does SaaS and a cloud architecture make all the difference as you look into your future strategy? So with that said, we're going to cover a few topics in our agenda. First is, what is the SaaS transformation relative to the data protection world? We're going to talk a little bit about SaaS in general, having not only started with the idea that there's a great deal of commodity administration and commodity architecture in all of our software stacks, and a lot of that complexity and risk can be eliminated in a SaaS model, but also apply that to what it shows up like inside of your data center or inside of your daily tasks as a storage and a backup administrator. We'll talk about the benefits in terms of how you spend your day, risks that you avoid, ultimately costs that you save, and speed that you generate, both in terms of working with a provider that's able to provide you new features on demand, but also as a user who spends less time with overhead tasks managing the environment. We'll then move on to talk a little bit about the implications for data, whether that is how to keep your data more compliant in a world where the regulatory framework is changing quickly around you, or ultimately starting to achieve the vision that we've been provided in the market, that is data as a new asset and maybe the most important asset for your growing enterprise. And then we'll sum it up and take some questions. So with that said, I'm going to hop into a little bit of market context because I think it's important for us as users, whether we're suppliers or whether we are customers, to have a view on where the world is going over the coming years. And there are some very stark numbers when it comes to understanding the impact of cloud and understanding the impact of SaaS that I think that we need to have in the back of our minds as we make decisions about the purchases that we're making over the coming years. First is the trend in cloud adoption we all know has been progressing and even accelerating over the past 10 years. In the particular space of public cloud storage, we've now approached the crossover point. So in the next 1.5 years, we're going to see the point at which more cloud storage is being purchased than data center enterprise storage. And what this means for you as a user is that as volumes increase, prices decrease. They've already been doing this, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But as that shift happens and the cost economics shift even more favorably in the cloud, your data center economics not only will get worse, but your ability to support that infrastructure with skills is also going to be more challenged. The market will start to choose professions. When we think about graduates coming out of universities, they're going to know, if you will, which way the wind is blowing. And so the momentum is just going to continue to build as data shifts into that public cloud. Secondly, if you would ask a CIO, and this was a survey taken recently by ESG, where their cost savings or opportunities are, and in particular, when they're challenged with continuing to shift legacy spend, maintenance spend into innovation spend, the number one area that a CIO will identify for improvement, and even where there is believed to be hidden opportunity, is in streamlining storage. So here you have a trend of knowing there's more savings combined with a trend of where the solution is emerging in the cloud. Put the two together and you see more and more action being taken. This, of course, is being fueled by the third metric we're providing you, which is the average CAGR decline in the cost of cloud storage over the past 5 years. This is a trend that we should continue to witness over the coming 3 to 5 years as well, whether that comes in the form of continued 60% straight price reductions or the introduction of new SKUs so that cost and performance can be optimized with different service offerings by cloud providers. And then ultimately, we know that the vast majority of enterprises are either going to completely migrate away or be significantly cloud-focused in their global architectures, so that by 2025, we would expect to see somewhere in the order of 80% of enterprises representing themselves as primarily, if not completely, cloud architected oriented. And then last but not least, impacting all of this large infrastructure set of topics comes the use of data. And those of you working in this space understand that there's been a significant increase not only in the types of regulations, but the number of industries impacted by them and the variety and flavors of even the regulations that existed. So for example, in data privacy, where we discussed at GDPR just a few years ago, we're now seeing in the United States, state-by-state versions of those data privacy laws, all of which will need to be accommodated by your business. What are the conclusions from all of this? Well, as we look forward, we know that the buying trend on premises, as it declines from a storage point of view, is trending toward buying IOPS, not bytes. Customers who are keeping workloads and increasingly needing to defend why to keep workloads on premises are doing so for high performance reasons as opposed to simple data storage. Secondly, as we look at the evolving trends in the cloud, not only are prices decreasing, but utility is increasing. We look to our public cloud providers not only to provide us more scalable storage, but the ability to tap into the ability to look into that data and leverage it for advanced use cases like analytics into the future. And last but not least, we expect that as better visibility is provided into long-term stored data and better access controls, better APIs and extensions, we think even historic behavior is going to evolve to match the new model. We at Druva understand and see the difference from a customer who is coming from a tape environment, who rarely, if ever, destroyed a tape or changed a long-term retention policy. In the cloud, will delete up to 16% of their data on an annualized basis. This is a customer that has been provided the tools and the understanding of what that data is in order to more proactively manage it. So you can imagine a world where not only are costs going down on a per unit basis, but your ability to even manage your total volumes is improving through the tools that cloud and cloud providers are offering. So moving forward, what are the initiatives, if you will, the compelling events that give our customers an ability to start to move into a world where they can take advantage of lower costs and better control, or the ability to avoid risks and regulatory changes, or the ability to take advantage of opportunities in analytics? Clearly, one of them is the cloud mandate that exists in most enterprise today. Rarely do we, and I doubt that many of you, speak to an enterprise that doesn't have some form of cloud journey underway, whether that starts with migrating archive storage, or a better business continuity strategy, or building DevOps infrastructures, or ultimately primary applications. We know that data center consolidation is underway. IDC will tell you over the next couple of years, there will be 2,000 fewer data centers in the world as there are today. And that's on a net basis. Consider that within that are CSPs continuing to build new facilities, and you'd realize that enterprises are not only closing more facilities they're building, but the facilities that they have today remain unfilled as compared to where they were 15 and 20 years ago as they were designed. Secondly, business continuity investments are perfectly suited to the cloud. The ability to store your data in the cloud, leverage that for an on-demand startup of an application, provide a utility-based and low RTO environment for an application to be recovered. Again, compared to the legacy strategies we've all understood in replicating storage hardware and even data center facilities to achieve the same level of business continuity. Some of the newer challenges that we're facing are investments in security, where again, we understand from many analysts remain a top 3 investment area for both 2019 and 2020 if we project forward, in particular focused on ransomware detection, a threat that hits not only large enterprise, but even disproportionately mid-market enterprises who have less expertise to invest in the proper defenses and who are in the sweet spot of the sort of ransoms that are paid, typically in the $30,000 to $50,000 range, and that often go unreported. So investments in cloud with their better infrastructure, with the better security tools and better visibility, and also the air gaps, and we'll talk about this in a bit, that providers like Druva offer also ensure our customers against these sorts of challenges and risks they face every day. And of course, long term, we look at the ability to take your largest data set in backup, your most diverse data set in backup, 2 of the preconditions to successfully deploy analytic strategies, attached to scalable utility-based compute. And you have finally the basis to leverage a data lake in a productive analytics practice. Customers have aspired to the data lake for many years, more hype than reality for most businesses, largely because in order to solve this problem, today they're having to build yet another data stack with yet more integrations, yet more administration challenges, and at a cost that is rarely recovered because those data lakes and those analytics practices are rarely real-time and ongoing. Cloud solves those problems. So we have opportunities today in our investment, but where we're coming from is often quite challenged. One of the big changes in the last 20 years in technology architecture, as all of you have experienced and are living with the consequences of, is that the environments become massively more distributed. If we go back to the mainframe time and it's how it was broken apart into distributed systems, and we play that forward into not just distributed systems, but distributed applications in the form of virtualization, the rise of the mobile device and the mobile compute. Now, with the evolution of what's called edge, or formerly called the Internet of Things, we have a world in which data is created and processed in ever more fragmented ways. And our response up to this point has been to create unique and hard to manage architecture silos along the way. And the consequences have been clear. Inability to see in our data, inability to leverage that data across applications where it typically will get its best value, redundancy and duplication of data as we've had to replicate these stacks, fire drills over answering questions about compliance or budgets, risk as we're trying to keep these environments patched and upgraded with sufficient capacity planning behind them, and of course all the skills behind all of that, and then a significant fragmentation and proliferation in the supplier base as choices are made on a workload-specific basis, but ultimately creating a very costly environment to manage. Fragmentation has been the enemy. Public cloud is a significant part, maybe not the only part, but significant part of the solution. It solves many of these problems. First of all, public cloud is the only architecture in which costs go down over time. Even today, customers achieve up to 50% lower total cost of ownership simply because the straight costs are less. Now, we understand there are risks in that environment in terms of properly taking advantage of all the things that public cloud providers have offered. And the variability in some of those charges does challenge the end user at times to realize the targeted savings. And this, of course, is an area where providers like Druva help. But you also realize added benefits. We don't strand capacity in the public cloud. We don't have to worry about scale. And we can say yes to more business cases because we can not only build faster and at lower initial cost, we can even distribute that architecture globally to where it makes the most sense. Or we can eliminate other challenges around data protection, data privacy, and data compliance rules, where typically we would have had to invest in additional data centers that create a high hurdle rate for business case acceptance. This also allows you to evolve your IT team. We understand that the skills are changing over time. If you look at the highest paid skill sets in the market today, they've evolved to be cloud architects, DevOps administrators, or analytics professionals, where they once were storage architects, CCIEs, network administrators, or security professionals, and if you look further back, storage administrators and yes, backup administrators. So as the IT organization is evolving toward the latest technology advancements, in particular focused on data, we're going to have to figure out a way to take work off some of our current infrastructure teams, allow them to broaden their remit, which ultimately means less time per task or tasks removed to the vendor. And then last but not least, with the, of course, advent of the internet, but also the ability really to distribute products globally very easily, going global is a key requirement. Now, global has become extreme, of course, because global now means that you might have an edge point or an IoT device, a sensor, or a video camera literally on a particular small square footage premise. It means your larger regional data center. It may mean your global data center, or it may mean there is no consolidated data center. You're simply trying to create points of presence in all of the operating countries in which you have an operation. Cloud solves these problems. It lowers the barrier to yes. It lowers your cost today and tomorrow. It provides you a pathway to improved efficiency, and it allows your most critical asset, your team, to focus in the areas where they're going to have the highest returns into the future. Let's talk about that TCO message a little bit further. So as I said earlier, the 5-year cloud CAGR in AWS in particular has been negative 60%. I doubt there are many enterprises that look into their data center and claim that their storage environment has had that kind of cost decrease over the past 5 years. In fact, most are buying expensive, underutilized hardware that they're amortizing over a 5-year period. So even if they felt that they got a good upfront deal, of course, the year-over-year price to them is flat at best. And in the meantime, data is growing. So this puts pressure not just on the CapEx environment or possibly a leasing strategy, but also on capacity planning for colo, the increase in administration cost to manage it, network ports, of course, then additional network fees coming out of the data center, and all of the costs that are often even hard to quantify that get pulled along with that. And at the same time, where we're trying to just keep up with the basics of data growth in our storage environments, cloud is not just lowering price, but it's offering you options. More storage tiers gives you better ability to differentiate the type of performance you want for your applications. And all of this is reflected in the curve that we're showing you. The crossover in the end has already happened. While secondary data is growing substantially, cloud storage costs are decreasing substantially. This is a bit of a fait accompli. Cold storage, or as I said earlier, the bytes, not the IOPS, are going to move to cloud simply because the economics require it. But of course, as I said earlier, there are many other reasons and beneficial effects of doing this as well. It's not just cloud, however, that gives us these advantages. On top of all of this are SaaS models that allow you as a user to take advantage of other ways to both reduce cost and reduce risk. We've seen this happen already. We're all remembering, I hope, the days when Salesforce.com went straight at companies like Microsoft and Oracle with the no software emblem. And their message was clear. When you do large-scale software deployments, you incur risk, you incur ongoing administration costs, and the vast majority of what is created by enterprises is commodity and is common. 80% of a software stack is shared with every other software stack, and only in that last 20% where a company is even trying to differentiate itself. And so we've seen how this SaaS wave, as IDC calls it, has taken over. It started with Salesforce, and obviously with replicas behind it. It's moved to collaboration, it's moved to ITSM, it's moved to telephony, and it's even made its way down into the developer tool sets, including common areas like GitHub, Twilio, log management areas, and then of course developer tools. It's making its way into databases, but it hasn't yet made its way into data protection. Which, as I said earlier, when it comes to storage costs and the fact that very rarely does one company significantly differ from another company in its data protection management strategies, is a bit mind-boggling. Companies like Druva today can offer you cost savings and administration overhead savings while reducing your risk and improving your security posture simply by doing the easier thing. We think that SaaS is your next data protection strategy as you start to retire your legacy appliances, as you get tired of playing front-end terabyte licensing in a world of deduplicated storage on the back end, or where you want the ability to adopt features on demand and not have to wait 12 to 18 months for not only a general release, but your ability to upgrade into it. IDC's recent survey of enterprises' requirements to adopt new solutions showed that the number one request was that the product or the service is regularly improved upon. And as all of us know as consumers, we can only do that in a world where we can adopt a new feature without having to go through a significant change management or change control process. We cannot afford to upgrade our software and hardware in our data centers on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, or in many cases, even annual basis. Many enterprise customers even retain policies called N-1 policies, where they'll only adopt a feature version behind, which of course ultimately slows your business down because it means that you're failing to adopt the most recent advancements. In SaaS, you adopt a feature when it's made available. We release daily, weekly, and monthly, and see customer adoption immediately thereafter. SaaS makes your business less risky, makes it faster and more agile, and of course less expensive over time. We see the data reflect that customers understand this evolution. While data is growing substantially, the newer data is only making its way to cloud. When we think about edge cases like video or sensor data, traditional data is of course also making its way to cloud as customers start to retire colder and colder storage from the premises. And even the coldest storage not on their premises, in places like Iron Mountain, in favor of economics that are not only as favorable in the cloud but getting better, but as we said earlier, improving visibility and the ability to actually manage those volumes of data more effectively, hopefully even taking advantage of that data as the basis for analytics and data sharing in the future. And as all of those changes are happening, we see that SaaS is becoming the de facto standard for ultimately managing those environments. Here we see that a substantial number of companies are moving from an old on-premises version of architecture to a slightly modified cloud-hosted version where still they're maintaining much of the work and administration overhead to the most advanced state, where the only responsibilities they retain are those that are specific to their company policies and requirements. In the end, SaaS is winning the race, and why it is the fastest growing part of the IT ecosystem today. Now, you'll have others telling you that they're next generation, but the reality is that most of these vendors are the wolf in sheep's clothing. They are what we call the next generation of legacy. Do we acknowledge that companies built in the 90s and the early parts of the 2000s have an inherent risk, an inherent complexity and cost that often goes unstated? Of course. And could those have been and be improved upon? Of course. But what we hope our customers see is that they should not trade marginal incremental improvements in things like user experience or possibly the time to deploy yet another piece of hardware as opposed to the older hardware they own. But the reality that they could relieve themselves of all of those responsibilities by simply moving into a SaaS world. They can move away from a world where isolated and constrained data is part of the architecture, or where capacity has to be bought up front and then ultimately managed into, instead of simply used on demand, or where data copies are an inherent part of the architecture in order to make their way from one hardware to another one, or whether they need to make their way from a piece of hardware that in and of itself is a secondary data to archive into a tertiary environment, or where simplified administration could be replaced by no administration. And that last but not least, that customers shouldn't make incremental investments in areas where they're simply a stepping stone to what they know their end state will be with cloud, but they saddle themselves with a 3 to 5 year depreciation cycle, preventing them from completing that journey. We see this with our competitors today, whether it is competitors like Veeam that are forcing you not only to work with upfront costs with little deduplication and the complexity of trying to manage multiple vendors, hardware and software to manage an environment end-to-end, that simply try to archive to cloud, or vendors like Rubrik and Cohesity are charging you a very high dollar per terabyte rate for the pleasure of copying your data multiple times, and once again, copying that data yet again to the cloud in order to claim a cloud strategy. We simply move that data directly at lower cost with less redundancy and more utility, ultimately eliminating all of the back-end requirements that all of those other vendors have in capacity managing your hardware, upgrading, patching it, managing the colocation space, the networking, and so on and so forth. Now, we've given you a little background on the market trends, given some data around why we think that those trends will continue into the future. Prasanna is going to help us through a more specific understanding of how we stack up against some of those competitors to help you better understand what the critical decision-making factors are. And then we're going to wrap with some more specifics on Druva, how we solve this problem, and some of the economic and practical benefits that we provide you. Prasanna?
Thanks, Mike. So just diving a little deeper. So let's start with what Veeam provides. As you know, Veeam is a software-only solution, but it relies on some hardware backend for storing your backups. Since you are buying hardware and you are not going to buy on a daily basis, there's going to be some amount of stranded capacity or underutilized capacity that will be sitting there that you are pre-purchasing ahead of time. Of course, this leads to higher costs, and you have to worry about maintenance and support contracts, and like Mike said, over a 3-year depreciation cycle, worry about having that box there. In addition, with a hardware solution storage array that you need to also store your backups on, this is also a multi-vendor solution. So you have to deal with admin overhead, dealing with multiple locations where you have to have physical boxes located, which all increases to additional full-time employee costs. As you start to look at some of the options that Veeam provides, they do offer the ability to tier older backups to cloud. They call this cloud tiering. Unfortunately, if you actually dive deep into the products, you will realize that forever incremental backups, which Veeam is very well known for, does not actually work with cloud tiering. In order to be able to cloud tier your backups to Amazon or to any other storage, you have to periodically take full backups. As you well know, taking periodic full backups leads to additional storage costs, which increase your cloud storage costs as well. Finally, in an environment where you have multiple remote offices, you have multiple data centers, you have your DR copies that you're worried about, you can end up with multiple copies being hosted on these locations, which once again leads to large costs. We've seen this in customers that we've talked to when once you start looking at more than 2, 3, 4 remote offices, data centers, when you start looking at tiering to the cloud, when you start looking at even having a cloud disaster recovery solution, you end up with so many copies of your data across so many different sites that these are costs that you may not have initially thought about when you want to say, how do I protect my virtual machine? Now let's take a look at another approach. In this example, we're looking at Rubrik with a sort of hyperconverged model. With Rubrik, you have to buy an appliance, right? It's all CapEx based. And if you try to use their virtual appliances, there are some inefficiencies. For instance, once you reach more than 10 terabytes, of course you have to bring in a new appliance. There is no global deduplication across all the sites, which once again leads to storing multiple copies across your infrastructure. In fact, we've seen up to 10x the amount of storage required from just having versus having a single backup. In addition, as I increase the number of sites, there's more complexity to the deployment aspects. I have to worry about how do I procure equipment. I have to worry about racking and stacking, having someone on site who can manage failures or issues with my hardware. All of these things add up to additional costs in terms of people costs. Finally, if you look at disaster recovery in the cloud, one thing that is not mentioned is in order to actually be able to do disaster recovery, it not only requires having your first copy of data stored there, kind of tiered to the cloud, but also being able to rehydrate that data in order to finally be able to convert it and store it as an Amazon machine image that you can actually boot to. So if you think about it, there are actually 3 copies that I'm storing in order to be able to leverage Cloud DR. Once again, this adds to multiple copies in the cloud, the amount of time it takes to actually do the conversion, and additional costs that you may not be expecting. Now, how does Druva change the game? Right? You just deal with a lower cost per terabyte. You don't have to worry about all these copies being stored in multiple locations. Everything gets globally deduped in one single location. I don't have any backup products or footprint in my data center. I don't have to worry about, do I have hardware? Do I have to worry about hardware refresh cycles? How do I deal with multi-vendor? Everything is very simple on premises. We have global source side deduplication, which can help save you bandwidth and data transfer costs, especially when sending data from remote offices, which might have low bandwidth needs, or might have low bandwidth sending to the cloud. All of this is intended to provide you the lowest cost. Like Mike said, we are built on top of AWS as a SaaS solution for data protection. We are able to leverage Amazon's dropping costs in order to give you a lower price point versus the competition, now and going forward. Finally, as you start to look at adding new workloads, as you start to bring up new data centers or new workloads, you no longer have to worry about pre-provisioning and buying for that capacity. As you increase your footprint, you can continue protecting and seamlessly scale up and down as you retire older workloads and only pay for what you use. And unlike a lot of the other competition, this is all paid on a post-deduplicated basis, not based on front-end terabytes.
So how does this show up in terms of additional advantages? What we've established to this point is that data copies cost you money and we should be reducing them. That legacy architectures simply do not work in a cloud-based world. As try as they might, legacy providers without a native architecture will cost you more money, will cost you more administration overhead, and ultimately create more risk for your business. But these aren't the only benefits from adapting a SaaS solution. As we said earlier, what companies really want is the ability to leverage a vendor whose product gets better over time, and preferably not only gets better, but gets better without imposing additional requirements on you, the user. What we've shown you here is that as a SaaS provider, we are able to update your system on a regular basis. These are 4 features that we've released just in the last month. New consumption analytics capabilities, full DR orchestration to and from your premises, a full enterprise search capability. And as we look forward, the ability to automatically discover and apply policies to backup so that not only do you have reduced administration costs in deployment, we reduce the risk that there are parts of your environment unprotected or where the policy is inconsistent with your existing behavior. This now not only removes work from you as an administrator, it actually makes your data protection environment more intelligent and ultimately evolves with you over time. Only a SaaS provider can give you that kind of advantage. So how do we do it? Very simply. Because we are a centralized but globally distributed cloud-based architecture, we can centralize data for endpoints, for your data centers, and of course your cloud workloads as well, supporting your native services. If you're building new applications in addition to supporting your current data center environment, and those applications leverage core Amazon services, we can snapshot and manage those environments just as well as we can manage your virtual environments or your database environments inside of our cloud platform, providing you both backup and restore capabilities, but also integrated disaster recovery capabilities, thereby simplifying your stack from the premises. We build in governance, the ability to collect metadata, search across that metadata, and understand where your risk exists inside of your data sets. The ability to tier that data into cold storage for archival, but of course the ability both to delete and retrieve as necessary. And then ultimately, with data intelligence capabilities, manage all of that more effectively over time, and then increasingly in the future, providing easy access for analytics providers as well as those provided by Druva directly. There are clear advantages as a SaaS provider that we think are the litmus tests for your decisions as you look forward in data protection. Can your solution save you 50% over your baseline when you renew with your current provider or you choose another one? Do they eliminate parts of your architecture as no longer necessary? No more hardware, no software, stranded capacity. If you're having to do any of these things, buy hardware, buy software licensing that you don't use, or commit long-term to owning a software license that you don't know that you'll need long-term, or pay for a capacity that you're not yet consuming, you are paying too much. And is security built in? As with Druva, you're able to encrypt that data from source to long-term storage and know that you control both ends of that key, able to control and use that and extend access as necessary, so you have a combination of the best possible security with the best possible flexibility, and know that that's done across the entire chain of your data lifecycle. The fact that you can deploy in 15 minutes or less, which we believe is another litmus test question. If you can't order and be up and running in 15 minutes, then you're spending too much time and too much effort. Hardware providers fail this test immediately. Your order requires shipping, requires capacity to be allocated to your data center, requires someone to rack and stack and ultimately install. Software providers the same. Does your provider provide you a guaranteed SLA across various storage stacks without having to manage different vendors? Your vendors today cannot provide you that guarantee because they put you at the center of trying to coordinate a complex and heterogeneous vendor environment. Can your solution today reach to the parts of the earth where you want to deploy your data and serve your business? And can that happen without additional cost to you as a user? And can that scale into petabytes without capacity management or without having to inform your vendor ahead of time or inform your CFO or others at your business to pre-allocate dollars for you? And then last but not least, does your strategy facilitate or hinder your access to that data? Does it give you an easy API? Does it give you access controls? Does it make all of that available in a scalable way? And again, in the region where you want it deployed. So we have some very simple ways to think about this across security, across performance, across cost. Don't copy. Don't pay front-end terabyte licensing. Do invest in declining storage costs. Choose not less administration, choose no administration. And choose optionality for your data. Companies like you are already adopting these solutions. SaaS is a strategy adopted both from the smallest businesses in the world to the largest businesses in the world. Here we have a selection of customers already working in the Druva environment, knowing that they're saving money every day with better access to their data and less work in order to maintain that security and the reliability of restoring it. So as the end game for data protection, some numbers to remember. We're going to save you that 50%, but more importantly, we're going to save you more every year. We challenge any vendor in the industry to represent the same for you. We'll eliminate complex and risky parts of your environment, whether that is in hardware that needs to be refreshed, maintained, and updated, or software where you own licenses forever on your balance sheet and where you're compelled to buy maintenance, even in the cases you're no longer using that software, for fear that you are only going to call in for small amounts where the vendor wants to collect on the full license footprint. Have no administration. Let's eliminate a lot of the commodity back-end tasks that make your day both monotonous and difficult. And challenge your vendors on the basics. Global deduplication. That means data in any environment across the globe should be deduplicated as opposed to treated like a standalone architecture as many of our competitors are doing today. Get up and running quickly and do that not only simply as an administrator through a GUI, but also through an API integrated into some of your most common other vendors. And adopt features instantly. Know that you can come into work and be enabled or put a request into Druva, have your request life-cycled from a lifecycle process, and have that available to you in a predictable and timely way. And do that all with a secure, certified environment where, in the end, what really matters is that you're able to access and manage and leverage that data better into the future. we're showing you these values over time. In July, you'll be able to come to the Druva website and plug in your specific environmental attributes and understand exactly how much you're going to be able to save working with Druva. Here we've provided you just a quick idea of a TCO calculator that incorporates the costs of software and hardware, of administration, and shows how much you can save by making the pivot to SaaS and making the pivot to Druva. So what are our next steps? We're easy to use, we save you money, we reduce your overhead. Getting a demo or starting a POC is as simple as going to the website. You can contact your rep around an assessment using the TCO model today that we just discussed, knowing that will also come to you publicly in just a few weeks. So with that said, we hope you consider SaaS as your next pivot to data protection, knowing that it is the future way to manage your data growth with a declining cost profile, the ability to eliminate monotonous, costly, and risky daily tasks, and ultimately unlock your largest and most diverse data set for better use by your business. And with that said, we're going to turn it over to a little bit of Q&A.
Thanks, Mike. So we have the first question, which is around, is Druva SaaS only? Is it flexible to be deployed as an IaaS architecture?
Druva is a SaaS-only architecture from a cloud application point of view, but we should emphasize we understand that many of our enterprise customers and many enterprises today are in fact on a cloud journey, and they do need support for premises architecture. So where you can work with Druva in a traditional sort of way is to deploy our virtual appliance and use that virtual appliance on premises to manage workloads that need to either have data retained locally or where bandwidth limitations or other architecture considerations require management of that data before it moves to cloud. So the hybrid environment is one that is friendly to a SaaS strategy. You will also see us deploy that or have deployed that in strategies collaborating with Amazon. For example, we are able to distribute Druva on a Snowball Edge device, providing you with local storage and recovery capabilities.
Thanks, Mike. And going along the SaaS route, for cloud storage, are you paying Druva and AWS?
It's a very good question, and one that we understand that we get frequently because our competitors do require you to have relationships with many vendors in order to achieve a fully deployed data protection strategy. With Druva, you only pay Druva for the entirety of your data protection footprint, which means Druva will handle the necessary storage tiering, the resiliency of that data, of course, all the management of capacity. And as Amazon both lowers prices as well as introduces new storage tiers, you can count on Druva to adopt those and to pass those benefits on to you as well as a single vendor, single throat to choke.
And what about things like egress charges and other charges like that as well?
Also a great question that we get frequently. We understand similarly that customers, when they have a bad cloud experience, often talk about the variable charges that go along with leveraging the cloud. And one of those variable charges that frustrates the most is this idea of egress, that once you put data into cloud storage, that you are then charged in order to remove it. We at Druva understand that you only store this data in a backup and restore use case because you might need to retrieve it, and to be charged extra is a real challenge. So with Druva, your egress fees are embedded, which means that you pay us one fee for backup and restore, knowing that you are free then to use that data for the backup and restore use cases as you need to.
Thanks, Mike. You showed the solution against Rubrik and Veeam. What about stacked against Zerto?
Zerto, like many other point solution providers, asks you as a customer to invest in yet more storage, yet more data copies, yet more administration, in this particular case, simply for the benefit of doing disaster recovery orchestration. In the case for Druva, rather than employing a full stack environment for disaster recovery or a business continuity strategy, we're able to leverage the single copy of data that we retain in the cloud as the basis to restore into your VPC, So you were able to recover a VM, leveraging cloud data, moved quickly and at little cost, at a third of the price that you would find a competitor like Zerto. So with Druva, once again, the idea here is that, unlike on-premises, you're able to leverage the same data copy for multiple services. And in the cloud, because a service is really just a callable application, that you only then pay for the application when used. This gives you not only the ability to adopt and integrate and converge your services in a way you cannot do on-premises, but it gives Druva, as well as you as a customer, the ability to look into the future and understand that there will be more and more services applied to that data and more ability then to adopt new use cases at utility-based economics.
Thanks, Mike. Now switching it up slightly. Now we've talked about LTR or long-term retention. And how can I ensure that I'm minimizing my LTR footprint, but maximizing my ability to see my data?
So one of the challenges that Amazon often talks about in the area of cold storage is what is called data curation. It's the challenge that customers have that once they put data into cold storage, not dissimilar to tape, that unless they understand through the application, they don't know what they put there. And that, of course, as the bills mount over time, creates a challenge for a customer to adequately manage the environment. And often the savings that were assumed around cold storage are offset by retaining data that they don't know how to delete any longer. Working with Druva, we provide you with a single catalog, searchable catalog that helps track data kept in warm environments for better performance and then tiered into cold environments that give you the ability to take advantage of lower cost storage when the access rates predict and or you create a policy that an access rate is going to be lesser and therefore able to be moved to a longer term environment, but with the confidence of a single catalog where you can then search and understand what data is present there, and ultimately the ability to both delete and or restore from that data. So when you work with Druva, you get this single catalog, but the multiple storage tiers that create cost savings over time, and in the future allow you to leverage and understand that data for other purposes as we anticipate the future where you're able to select and restore and or directly do analytics exercises in an asynchronous way in cold storage environments.
Thanks for that. So another concern that people have with going with cloud, and I know you've talked about this, is cloud as safe as tape? Or can it be hacked, right? So why should I trust the cloud? Can you go a bit more into detail on the security aspect?
That's a great question, and alluded to that at the beginning, but should have followed through further. We think about security in two ways. One is, am I treating the data that I have in the most secure way possible when it comes to encryption and access controls? And as I mentioned earlier, you as the public key owner are able to and required to encrypt your data from start to finish when it comes to Druva. And then any further services that Druva believes it can offer on that data is a process where we are engaging you to approve our ability to see into that data. And then, of course, that privilege is removed when the service is no longer employed. We are very proud of our security infrastructure, but we also understand that customers think not just about the security they have relative to the data that they know about, but also what happens to data that in their current setup may sit in the same environment, even if treated well, but is exposed to an intruder who either from an insider perspective or an exfiltrator makes their way into a network environment and is able to move their way through various tiers of data, even compromising the very security controls that were supposed to obscure the data from them. In the case of Druva, similar to the case of tape, we are an air-gapped solution. Your data actually sits outside your local network, which means that any intruder, insider or from the outside, cannot access or cannot leverage their position from within the network to jump to the network where Druva maintains your data. So we are an effective replacement for tape on top of the highest level of securing the data that is in our control.
Now, are all the functionality you talked about today available for FedRAMP and GovCloud as well?
We have security and certifications to work in the FedGov space. Obviously, some of those are less robust than others. We are happy to supply through the website which agencies we are fully compliant with and which ones are on the roadmap.
Thanks, Mike. I think that is all the questions for today.
So we thank you again and look forward to speaking with you on an upcoming webinar.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Prasanna, for such a great presentation today and all the comprehensive answers to questions submitted from our audience. Also, I would like to thank our audience for their participation. As a reminder, we will be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the webinar recording shortly, and you can stay on the lookout for that email. That concludes our webinar today. Thank you all, and have a great day.